There's a lot of talk about small-scale industry, small and medium enterprises. Again, all over the world, these are the enterprises that actually produce jobs in large number. Big enterprises are capital-intensive, and the technology that they're using is in fact reducing the number of jobs they produce. The small enterprises are more capital-intensive, and they are producing more jobs. But the difference is that in India, we have a very lopsided sort of system where our small and medium are really dominated by tiny enterprises. So when we say small and medium, they have to be small and medium enterprises that can produce products that are actually sufficiently modern to be fitted into a more modern economy. So the enterprise is small in the sense that maybe it's not an enterprise with 2 and 3 and 4 people, but it's maybe an enterprise that has between 100 and 500 people. And we don't have enough of these. Most of our small industries are really very tiny workshops which by and large are not able to produce products which can competitively be fitted into a modern industry. Take automotive components, for example. As we upgrade the quality of our automobiles, the quality of the components that the automobile needs goes up very substantially. And the fellows who were producing components for bicycles 15 years ago, with a certain type of technology, they cannot actually manufacture components that would be necessary for modern automobiles. Again, a big structural change will have to take place. And linked to that is the whole issue of formalization of the economy. I think one of the big problems in the last several years is that, while employment has been created according to the data, a lot of it is contractual and informal. Even in the private sector where it has expanded, they've not actually expanded formal employment, they've expanded employment on a contractual basis. Now, I think the government has made some changes in the law that will facilitate expansion of contractual employment, and that's probably a good thing. But we have to recognize that the nature of jobs, therefore, is going to be quite different in the years ahead. And I think this is something that young people, it's a mental attitude. Young people are very flexible. They can be persuaded to do different things. But in India, I think the parents are all the time telling them you must go for a permanent job. Now, they have their own mind, but I think we should recognize that it's a world in which they are going to have to experiment. I always tell younger people when I meet them that unlike my generation, where most of the people that graduated around the time that I did had the expectation that they would be in one job pretty much for the rest of their lives, slowly moving up. This new generation will be changing jobs all the time. And I find when I talk to students, they're actually quite happy doing that. But their parents are utterly miserable. So I think, frankly, this is one of the things that the parents need to understand, that the world has changed and not put unnecessary pressure on their kids, preventing them from adjusting to the kind of world that now exists. Linked to this is the other area of change I talked about, which is financial inclusion. Now there, you're really seeing a tremendous change in the underlying technology. You will see a move away from cash transactions gradually. I don't think it should be pushed, but it'll happen automatically. And the moment you see that, it'll also formalize the economy, because if you're really not into cash transactions, then you are going to be subject to more tax scrutiny, which is a good thing. So over time, this will be a very substantial change. But in this change, you have to recognize one thing. Not all small enterprises will formalize without trouble. Many of them, their economics depends on not having to pay the taxes. I mean, they're not economically viable if they pay the same taxes as the formal sector does. So, soon, one way or the other, you will see another structural change. It's not that all the informal sector enterprises will survive and flourish. Some of them will become formal and maybe become 3 and 4 times larger. They'll still be quite small, but as a result, the other ones will get squeezed out, and the people who are working in those will have to find jobs in the economies, in the enterprises that are expanding. Again, a traumatic development, but it is a structural change, and somehow we have to adjust to that. And I mentioned earlier that the problem of banking, I mean, I find it amazing, I'm sure that's true in Guwahati also, that, within the same building, you will have 3 branches of public sector banks, which is completely unnecessary, in the sense that in the old days, this was necessary because if you wanted to cash a check or deposit something or whatever, you needed all those tellers. But in a day of ATMs and so on, you don't. So this is an area where technology is likely to have quite a big impact, probably within the next 10 years or so. Finally, let me just talk a bit on climate change, because that is another issue that is facing the whole world. And it will face us more than other countries. I mean, India is in the geographical or geoclimatic range where it will be one of the more heavily affected countries by climate change. We don't have an international agreement, and indeed the United States has backed off from the Paris Accord, although they are the biggest emitter so far, maybe the second biggest after China. But let us assume that somehow or the other, at some point, the US will also come on board. And today we are participating in climate change talks, and quite happy about it, and saying that, well, there is a kind of international agreement by every country to moderate its own carbon emissions. This is actually quite a big achievement in one sense, because, a few years ago, the developing countries were taking the position that, listen, we haven't caused this problem. It's you fellows, the developed world that has expanded so rapidly, you're the ones that has put all the CO2 into the atmosphere. So you should just do something yourselves and don't expect us to do anything. That's changed. And we are saying, look, we also have a responsibility. And all countries, except the US, have now laid down some kind of country commitment at how much reduction of emissions are they going to do. But the bad news is that even if all the countries achieve what they have promised to do, it is about 1/3 of what is needed in order to avoid drastic climate change. I mean, if you really want to keep the rise in temperature about 1.5 to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, you have to go to zero carbon emissions, zero, by 2050. We're nowhere near there. All that's happening is the growth of carbon emissions is slowed down. Getting to zero is a very, very distant prospect. So one way or the other, since we are going to be badly affected, one way or another, we expect that, somehow we will also be able to participate in some global agreement that will limit the impact on climate change. One of the consequences, by the way, of climate change is highly unpredictable precipitation, which can lead to much more floods than normal. We are right now within a couple of kilometers of the Brahmaputra, which is known to do a lot of flooding. So unless this climate change thing is brought under control, that problem will only get worse, and that will have a lot of impact on people's lives and livelihoods and so on. So it's not something that we can ignore. But how do we do it? You know, there are only two things that will actually bring about a significant impact. One is a shift to green energy, which means much less slowly getting away from coal. Now, you know, we have said we want green energy, solar, wind and so on. But we have not actually set targets for how much reduction of dependence on coal are we planning. And probably we need to do that. One consequence of that will be that the price of electricity will go up. And the other side of what you have to do for climate change is promote energy efficiency, which means you produce the GDP you do, but with much less energy. Now, you know, any economist will tell you that if you want to economize on something, then you raise the price of that thing. If you don't raise the price, there's no reason why anyone should economize. So what we need to do is to put a lot more taxes on energy, particularly fossil fuel energy, and the resources we gain from that can be used to finance all the green energy. Otherwise, those resources will be an additional tax. I mean, we have opened a little chink in that door, because we did introduce a clean energy cess on coal. It was done in the last 2 years of the UPA at a very small level, 50 rupees a ton. The present government has increased it significantly to 200 rupees per ton, which is good. But you know, if you really want to neutralize the negative effect of fossil fuels, this tax has to be increased to 3,000 rupees per ton. That is certainly going to include a big increase in the price of electricity, which will raise a howl all around. But it is one of the structural changes that we have to face. So what I won't go on and on. What I've been trying to sort of say is that very often these debates are conducted in terms of what is needed as a policy. And you know, if the policy looks good, people say that's fine. If it doesn't, they say it's not. But I think we have to recognize that underlying these recommendations is the recognition that we are trying to either cope with or encourage certain kinds of structural changes. And those are very big changes. So if you want to encourage those, then some of the actions you have to take is correspondingly more difficult. So with those words, thank you very much for inviting me and listening to me. And I mean, if there are any questions, I'd be very happy to take them.